It was good to see you. It made me very, very happy to see somebody like you up here on this panel.
If you want to grab coffee.
Just built and executed, so it's wrapping around browser I have two.
Sorry.
No, I know it has to be. So I'm going to head out. I'll see you next time.
Okay, please. Yeah, we have another event on April 12th about immigration.
Yeah, I'll
And Councilman Cassar is coming. So if you sign, did you sign up? Did you RSVP for this?
I already RSVP'd for the immigration.
Oh, you did? Awesome.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I'll
Wonderful.
definitely
Thank you
come
so
to
much.
my office for the
Great, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming. It was nice
Thank
to
you,
meet you.
David. Bye.
Greg, thank you so much. I appreciate it. No, that's fine. I thought it ended up working out perfectly. It was great. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, John. It was great to meet you. Yeah, I really thank y'all for coming.
Anywhere you can find space is a good space.
Well, when I hear Microsoft, I'm a Linux Until now, they're finally embracing. Yeah, they both fought it for the longest time. They finally give up. But that's helping them. It helps them now. I wish they joined the Linux consortium. Paid the big bucks to get a big scale table. So then I shut it again because I thought, I'm going to have to start using backslash in my copy. I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to stick it down. Well, you can follow the whole thing, but does anyone do system D? Yeah.
So far, so good. Brian's always do everything. I've also got yours.
It sounds like a Microsoft.
So I could definitely have the base. Right.
That's really true. I know. They're like one day or something.
Since they give it out every time they need to respond.
It's simple. It's still working.
Okay. Display up to
Because that's the one thing I've got to put in. It's decent. But I always struggle with You know, right now I'm really just kind of occasional thing, and they're just kind of teeny tiny windows. So, oh sure, yeah. When I go home,
Okay, everybody, pizza is here. So if you want it, head on back, grab some before we get started. So for anybody tuning in online, we're going to get started in a little bit here. We are running behind from the meetup that was in here beforehand, so just sit tight. Thanks.
okay, so like
Semi-regular, yeah. I am. Software. Usually it's but I like to start early in the company and hopefully get out of the soon. But I'm in for the most part. I've been in 5 startups.
What would be your favorite one?
None of them, they all failed. The next one is my favorite. No, but about STEM and
Does anyone have a MacBook Pro power cord that could live without for like 30 minutes? 20, 14, maybe 14 maybe?
I'm just a little biased.
No. I've always had a good time. Place to be from. Same as Fort Worth. I'm not. I saw one of these. These people. There's no big call for desktop.
found all different documents that have fresh as our key desktop. And so I didn't have to go through all the around this online yourself, right? So the real power of this is that going back to the
If anyone's looking for a seat, there's still plenty of seating up here on the side.
You. When I can get yeah, when I can get
I have a question for you guys. Is one of you want to get up and say something?
Brian, try to stand here.
I have a microphone. I should stand. Well, live stream actually. So if you want anyone who's watching, so not to confuse them. You want to put the name to the face. Perfect. You can just stand like right here.
Yeah, that works.
I said, I assume you're
Okay, start with that one. Yeah. I think it's gonna be more crap.
Probably. That was cool. I've not been for a Unix. That's cool.
It's definitely in the girls.
All right, I think we're going to get started. Thanks everyone for your flexibility. The meeting right before this was not on our radar, so we were just as surprised as you guys were. We just heard about it like an hour before, but we got it worked out just a few minutes late. Thanks for your flexibility. Cool, before we get started, so if you're new to the meetup, you can access the slides online, or if you're watching live stream, you can follow along. That first URL is where our slides are hosted, edgeatx.github.io. And then if you're interested, we also have a Slack group that is fairly active. So if you're interested in that, that's the second URL. And all these URLs, obviously, you know, the main one is that first one, because if you can find that, then you can get to all the URLs that we're going to talk about.
I don't really see today's slides.
Did it not get updated? Let's see. I wonder if I didn't update, hey Corey, I might not have updated this page, but, so like, let's see. If you're interested in just hacking the URL, last month's was 02-feb, this month's is 03-mar. So there you go. I think we just missed the link on the menu. Cool, so we normally start off with announcements. I'll get to you guys next. This is general announcements. So first off, if you parked here in the building, make sure you pick up one of these little cards from the guy at the desk there. Otherwise, it's very expensive when you go to leave. So with this card, it's only $5. So don't forget that. Also, after the meetup ends, several of us usually walk a block over to Buffalo Billiards, have a drink, socialize a little bit more, ask questions. So if anyone's interested in that, please stick around afterwards. And then we usually open it up to see if anyone's hiring or if you're looking for a job or anything like that. We have a lot of people tonight, so we'll do that, but just try to keep it pretty quick, also because we got started late. And I'll actually start. I'm looking for sort of a tech lead. The stack we're on is Python and front-end JavaScript web stuff, but it doesn't require Python. I'm really looking for sort of a well-rounded full-stack tech lead developer. So if you fit that mold, come talk to me. Who else has announcements? Anyone back here? Anyone not here? Yep.
Hi there, I'm Alex. I'm a senior software engineer at a company called Tenfold, and we just raised a Series A of $15 million and are looking to hire over 100 people in the next year of any position. In terms of our stack, we use nodes. We're looking for anyone that's talented in JavaScript. We also have a couple of Electron applications that also need some love. So if you're interested, come talk to me afterwards and look at that.
Okay, and by the way, my company did not raise $15 million. We do have free food in the pantry.
Yeah, we raised $120,000. We're super proud of that. My company is Writer Duet. We're currently in Techstars Austin, a few blocks away. We are currently hiring a UI UX person who also has a little bit of programming, enough to do what they're designing to some degree. We also have an Electron app and a lot of other cool stuff. It's all real-time collaborative screenwriting and creative platform for co-writing and collaboration. So Prospectify, we raised $1 million, and we're looking for one engineer. We abuse Node, so we use Node for everything on our platform, React and Node-based. We ingest about 1 terabyte of content a day in crawling infrastructure, leverage NLP and machine learning to boil all of that down to insights on about 10 million companies, and then connect companies with buying signals and usage signals to companies that are relevant. So we're hiring a VP of engineering or senior software role.
So we raised $0 million, but we're profitable, and we started with $5,000 in bank. We're multi-million-dollars now. Clients are Google and Microsoft. So if anyone wants to work for Angular team, Google, and if you want to work for ASP.NET Core team, Microsoft, let us know. Because we're hiring all the experts pretty much, and also junior developers. And we have AngularJS user group. If you're there, basically we give away free tickets to all the unemployed people. If you know any unemployed people, let us know.
So the $15 million guy, you should have told me you were going to do that. I would have made you go last. Stole everyone's thunder. Who else? Anyone else? Okay. And also, if you stick around afterwards, that's also the time to kind of meet people and network and that kind of good stuff. In the back, if you're looking for a seat, there's extra seating up here as well. Did I miss anything? Cool. You guys can all hear me, right? Got the microphone overhead. Pardon?
Slides, the links are good.
Oh, cool. So I think Corey fixed our link for us, hopefully. That's what I get for trying to update everything the day of the presentation. Cool. All right. First off, thanks to our sponsors. So Capital Factory graciously sponsors our room, gives us this space for free every month. So we really appreciate Capital Factory for that. And this month we have Tech Systems. So we have a few people here from Tech Systems. They were kind enough to sponsor our pizza and beer this month. So thank you, Tech Systems. And I think Nick was going to come say a word.
Yeah.
So.
Hey y'all, my name is Nick Strong. I'm an account manager with Tech Systems here in Austin over our digital and creative services practice. This is Megan and this is Soma. They both recruit for that practice. So we work with over 100 different companies that are based out of Austin. We work with over 6,500 nationally, and we deploy about 100,000 people with those companies nationwide every year. But focusing on our digital and creative services practice, we work with companies like Under Armour Connected Fitness, Whole Foods, General Motors, Express Scripts, and SunPower, just to name a couple. So basically anything that is going to be JavaScript development based, that's what we're focused on. So if you're looking for anything that is React, Angular, Node, anything flavor in between, please do come and talk to us. We have open positions right now, and we're more than happy to help you find your next career move if it's fitting for you. And then Corey, Brian, thank you so much for allowing us to be a sponsor. We're very excited to be here. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Will any of you have time to hang around afterwards in case anyone has
Absolutely.
questions? Cool.
Yeah, we'll probably grab a drink.
Awesome. All right, so inevitably we have new people each month, so I'll just give a really quick rundown of what we're about in case you're here just for the Electron. We're called Bleeding Edge Web because we don't focus on any one framework or language. We like to mix it up every month, and our shtick is we try to basically pick topics that we think are going to be interesting to web app developers, generally speaking. So every month we start off with a segment we call News from the Bleeding Edge. We cover sort of browser framework updates that we think are interesting, and then we have our main talk. So tonight is Electron. So if that sounds interesting to you, please continue checking us out. So first off, browser update. We actually, we met last month, but we didn't do this segment last month because we had other plans going on. So we haven't done our browser check since 2 months ago. So this is what the versions were in January. And Chrome actually has had 2 major releases. And if you're a web developer, you probably at this point aren't as interested in the day-to-day versions of browsers anymore like we used to be back in the old days. But it's still kind of interesting to know, and it's definitely good to keep up with the major features that come out. So a quick rundown of the most interesting things in Chrome. Chrome is now HTML5 by default, which means they're quickly phasing out Flash, not Flash support, but Flash support by default. They actually have this algorithm called their Site Engagement Index. So they basically measure on a per user basis how much they've interacted with a given site. And if it's the first visit to a site, for example, that would be an engagement of 0. And in that case, they actually disable Flash by default. So that's kind of part of a general move by a lot of people to start doing that. They've also introduced this web Bluetooth API, which is really cool. I tried to create an example of this that was going to be really neat, and it was going to prompt me, and I was going to maybe connect to my phone or something really cool like that. But what I realized is that CodePen is in an iframe, and this does not allow cross-iframe access. So the code is there in case anyone wants to look at it, and of course you can go to the pen and play with it, but this example doesn't really do much. But anyway, it's a cool API, so this potentially will allow you to access phones and heart rate monitors and all kinds of cool stuff through that API. Hello. All right, I was stuck in an iframe. Another really useful thing that they've added is position sticky as native CSS support for position sticky. So if you've ever messed with this feature where you want an item to be scrollable until it reaches a certain point and then to kind of stick. So at the moment, in most browsers, you pretty much have to use a framework that does it, or you have to do some really tricky code monitoring scroll position and stuff. So now it's built into the browser, and it's as simple as setting 2 CSS properties, position sticky and the top, and you're good to go. So that's very useful. And then in Chrome 57, and of course, there's other minor features as well that I won't go into, so obviously you can go check the release notes. So I'm just trying to pick out some of the highlights. This is a really good one, CSS grid layout. So if you haven't been paying attention to this one, this is basically, up until very recently, if you wanted to do grid-based layouts, you either were going to have to roll your own, which is very, very hard to do cross-browser, or you pretty much are using Bootstrap or some of the various other ones that are out there to do that. But of course, you don't always need Bootstrap, so it kind of stinks to have to download a whole framework if all you want is layout, for example. So now you can do it with some very simple HTML and some relatively simple CSS. So I'm not going to walk through all this, but the example is here, and I've also linked to a site that has a lot of really good interactive examples. This is something that is actually now fully supported in Chrome and Firefox, and I believe Edge, or it's coming in Edge soon. So this is something that is very close to being widespread supported across all the major browsers that we use. So definitely you should familiarize yourself with it. And then my personal favorite, background tab throttling. So if you use Chrome like I do, you know, it's notoriously kind of a hog and has been getting worse over the years. So they've actually made a big change in Chrome 57 so that now they're going to throttle background tab usage to no more than 1% of CPU. So that should drastically help if you use a lot of tabs like I do. That was a screenshot of Chrome for me while I was working on this slide. Notably, it does not affect WebSockets or WebRTC if you're familiar with those. So those are basically, if you have like background processes that you actually want to be running via those protocols, it won't affect that. It's mainly to get rid of the notorious, you know, Flash-based ads that run in the background and that kind of stuff that we're all aware of. So Firefox, I just mentioned Firefox 52 added support for the CSS grid stuff that we just saw in that previous example. They also added ES17 async and await. So that's another one that you'll hear about more frequently if you pay attention to JavaScript. Those are really useful for being able to write promise-based code. If you're not familiar with that, it basically, you know, in JavaScript and especially like in Node and other things that are based on JavaScript, traditionally you have to write sort of complex nested callback type code to do, you know, complicated things. And with async and await, it vastly simplifies that. So instead of having to think about everything, instead of having to think about it in terms of asynchronous and callbacks, you can actually think about your code as if it's synchronous. So it sort of simplifies how you write your code, but it still provides you all that nice async functionality. Firefox also, they tend to do really feature-packed releases, but most of their features tend to be more minor type things. But if you use Firefox, you should definitely check out the notes on this one. And particularly, I wanted to call out, they actually changed their implementation of set timeout and set interval. And I won't bother talking about it because it's very sort of techy. The reasons that they did it were very techy. I've called it out because if you have code that uses those, and if you happen to notice anything wonky in Firefox that is new, then you should definitely go check out this link that explains what they did, why they did it, and how it might affect you. Edge 14. So Edge doesn't do as dramatically interesting releases typically. It was fairly minor. They are also blocking Flash by default now, so that's pretty much the trend. Oh, by the way, just a side note. So this is perfect, the way this day's been going. I normally order pizza from Rounders Pizza, and I also normally get it delivered by Mr. Delivery. So I have all my orders saved in Mr. Delivery. I just log in, click one button, I'm good to go. I'm ready for the meetup. So I go to Mr. Delivery today, no time's available for delivery. It's like, what the hell's going on? So I actually, and their site looked normal, so I chatted with them and they said, oh, sorry, we don't deliver in Austin anymore. So I said, oh, that's great. So then I was like, okay, I'll just go straight to Rounders and do my order and just go pick it up or whatever. So I go to Rounders Pizza. Rounders is moving, so they're not in Austin anymore. Totally screwed up my whole plan for pizza, so I had to find a new place and do delivery and all that. Then after all that is when we found out, oh, these other guys are going to be here till 7, and it's going to screw up your scheduling. Like, great. So it's perfect that this thing is kicking me off. Anyway, so they're blocking Flash by default. WebRTC also, if you're not familiar with that, I won't go into it in detail, but it is notable that they've now enabled the 1.0 version of that by default. So that's basically RTC stands for real-time communication, so it's a way to basically allow your browser to do fancy background communication, and then lots of other minor stuff. Okay, so there's actually been lots of, not super major, but notable framework news in the last couple of months. I was actually surprised. So CoffeeScript is headed towards 2.0. Raise your hand if you use CoffeeScript still. A few people? No one raised their hand. Yeah, I don't get it. CoffeeScript was cool when it came out. I mean, now that sort of JavaScript has caught up to a lot of the syntactical things in the last couple of years, I'm not sure why it's still a thing, but I guess it is. So they're cruising along. Polymer, if you use that, they're headed towards a release candidate for 2.0. I called out a couple of more minor things just because I thought they were interesting. So there's this library called Store.js. It's actually been around for a while, but they just updated to 2.0. If you do anything with browser local storage, it's a really nice, very simple and small abstraction that makes doing that really easy, cross-browser, all the way back to IE6. So if you have needs for that, check that one out. Yarn, how many people use NPM? How many people have been using Yarn or have heard of it? About half. If you haven't heard of it or haven't checked it out, you should definitely check it out. It's basically a better NPM. It's a matter of opinion, but if you look at the feature set that they support, it's very heavily geared toward performance, and it's very heavily geared toward security. So they check checksums of packages, and they do a lot of deduplication and things that NPM doesn't do a great job of. So check it out. GitLab 9.0 just came out, which is a big release. So their last major release was like over a year ago. And then just calling out this one, because I wasn't super familiar with it, Marco, they're at 4.0. I'd never actually heard of it, but it's a UI library that eBay puts out. So I mean, eBay is kind of a household name. So when I see libraries like that, I definitely pay attention. So if you're ever in the market for sort of a new UI library or whatever, maybe check them out.
I was going to say, and on Yarn, if you want to play with it, it's literally drop-in replacement. You just RM your node modules directory, Yarn install, and it's exactly the same. You can see your project.
Yeah, and one cool thing about Yarn too is one of the big features they tout is predictability. So one of the historical things around Node is you npm install on one machine, npm install on production, you may not get the same things. Yarn really goes all out to try to make your installs as predictable as possible and repeatable as possible. All right, I mentioned well, I don't know if I did or not. ES 2016 is kind of our current standard for JavaScript. ES 2017 actually just got finalized, so they hit a milestone in January that basically said that the spec for what is going to be delivered feature-wise is basically set in stone. So it's not actually fully implemented yet in all the browsers, but the spec at least is finalized. The async functions that I mentioned earlier that Chrome implemented, that's part of the spec. And then the other one is shared memory and atomics, which is some fancy stuff related to parallelism and concurrency, making that stuff a little more sophisticated in JavaScript. And then if you're interested, they're already talking about ES 2018, although that's not nearly as firm yet. But if you're curious, check that out. Security. So we don't always talk about security, but a couple of notable things came out that I saw that I thought I would mention. So there was a study where they scanned 133,000 sites. They did the top 75,000 based on Alexa score, and then they did another random 75,000. And they found that 37% of sites included at least one major library that either itself had or it included as a dependency of a known vulnerable library. And so these percentages mean that of those 133,000 sites, the ones that included jQuery, for example, 37% of those had a version of jQuery that was vulnerable to some known security issues. Handlebars, 87% vulnerable. So the lesson there is update your libraries. And there are tools, especially if you're using NPM, there are utilities nowadays that allow you to automatically scan for vulnerabilities and stuff like that. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially as we hear about hacks and so forth in the news. And then sort of related to that is Docker. So if you use Docker, there's tons of hosted Docker images that are really convenient to just pull down and get up and running with Docker. Similar kind of study by a different group found that almost a quarter of all of the latest hosted Docker images have significant vulnerabilities. So pretty major, and the report that I linked to actually goes into quite a bit of detail and the various versions of operating systems that are most vulnerable and all kinds of stuff. So lesson is, of course, patch your images if you start with a hosted one. And definitely be aware of what you're pulling down. Don't just use that stuff blindly. All right. In case you missed it, how many people have heard of Glitch by Fog Creek, the Stack Overflow guys? So we actually talked about it, I think in December when it was first announced as Hyperdev. They called it at the time. Then I guess they've renamed it. So it's basically a hosted environment that anyone can use, but it's really specifically geared towards beginners and kind of getting people into programming in a really friendly, low barrier to entry way. They have all kinds of sort of starter kits and templates for doing all kinds of different kinds of projects. So especially if you're sort of on the newer side of programming, or maybe if you're not technical but you're sort of interested in it, or even for someone who is really technical but all you want is to throw up a quick example or something, this might be cool to check out. How many heard of this? Just came out like in the last week. Does anyone speak German? How do you pronounce that? Getzli? Anyway, I think it's German. It came out of a Swiss office of Google. It's a new JPEG encoder. Who knew that anyone was working on that, right? I kind of thought that was a solved problem, but apparently not. So some Google scientists, I guess, were working on this, and they found a way to take a JPEG, an existing JPEG, that was compressed already by libjpeg or whatever, and they shave an additional 20 to 30% on average off of that, while supposedly not only retaining the image quality, but in some cases increasing the perceived quality, right? So it's really interesting. If you look at the article about it, they talk about sort of the science behind it, how they rather than just taking the straight up math-based programmatic approach to it, they actually tried to model it based on human ocular perception, right? Typical Google type approach to it. But apparently they pulled it off. The big downside to it is that encoding is really slow, apparently. I haven't tried running it. I've seen feedback from people that say that the results are actually really good, but you just have to have a while. Like you basically point it at a folder and then walk away and have coffee for a while. You can download it yourself and try it, see if it is helpful. And then how many people are familiar with DMOZ? Am I the only really old guy here? A few old guys like me. So DMOZ has been around since back in the old days. Like they were one of the original sites back when Yahoo was all the rage, pre-Google. They shuttered last week. So kind of the last man standing in terms of the human curated search sites that used to be around. They were the last one. Now they're gone, so it's kind of sad. If you're old like me, if you're young, you don't care, but.
Oh, that's rich.
Oldish. Now for something completely different. How many people saw Fattest Cat? A few people. So it's my small attempt at humor. It's a really useful library. I actually installed it just so I could show you guys how cool this is. Oh, I forgot my background was a cat too. That's funny. So you just npm install Fattest Cat. You run it. It uses an API to scan the San Francisco SPCA database of cats. Pulls them all down, all the ones that are currently available for adoption. So we've got Anita, Waffle, Bud. So the network's a little slow. It ran for me faster. And so then it pulls them all down, it analyzes based on weight, and then it'll actually take you right to the page of the fattest cat that's available for adoption. Okay, well they found 36. Should we wait for it? I don't know. I'd hate for you guys not to see it after all that build-up. I'm gonna let that run for a second. All right, upcoming events, just a couple that I'm aware of. So there's a React training coming to town. Oh, there we go. So they took me right to Alex, who is 15 pounds, 6 ounces. Pretty serious. So Alex is up for adoption if any of you guys are interested in that. So now I have that installed on my machine forever until I uninstall it. But I had to show you because I thought that was cool. So there's a React training coming to town in a couple weeks, and normally when we put stuff here, we have coupon codes or something. Unfortunately, I don't have a coupon code for this one. I only bring it up because it's notable in that the creators of React Router are the ones doing it. So it's not just any old little training. Like it's 3 guys that are behind it, and they're all very well known in the React community. Ryan Florence, if you know him, Michael Jackson. And so if you have any interest in that, if you have a corporate budget that would let you do it, I definitely encourage you to check that out. And then there's a conference called Squares Conference up around in the Dallas area, a design and UX conference. So they actually gave us a code if you're interested in something like that. It's actually not too expensive to begin with, and then you get a discount if you're interested. So check that out. I think that's it for me. Any comments or questions before I turn it over to Corey? All right, thanks. Who was kind enough to let me borrow this? There's more seating up here too, if you guys want to see.
See if I can find an HDMI connection in here. Brian, we might need to get, no, I don't have anything. There's nothing.
That's what I'm saying. Are you trying to adapt from HDMI?
Yeah, I need problem is, I'm not sure if there's another cord. Oh, no, yeah, I have the old school one. Oh. They have there used to be a cable one here. No, this, oh, no. Thinking about it. There we go. All right, so I have quite a bit to cover, and since we got started late, I'm just going to get right into it. But you're all here for Electron, and anytime you're dealing with the newer technology or just kind of curious about it, it's always easier to kind of look at what the output of all this is. So I figured we'd just look at a couple of initial Electron apps that exist in the marketplace today. First off, here's Atom. This is really kind of, this is from GitHub. And it's interesting in the sense that this is really what drove Electron into the forefront of development. It used to, in fact, Electron used to be called Atom Shell, and it got moved over to Electron for naming changes when they hit, I don't even remember which version it was. But this is really kind of the app that led the charge. Second, we've got, the screenshots are a little bit cut off here, but this is VS Code, so another IDE written on Electron. Spotify, who knew? They actually moved into using Electron for their UI. They do have some other components in the app as well, but yet another one built on Electron. Slack, so if you are in the live channel right now, there's a good chance you could be using Electron there as well. Nylas, this is a mail client. This one, you can see here, this is a Windows edition, works on Mac as well, but again, built on Electron. And then this is kind of cut off, but this is Fenix. I'll be talking about that a little bit later. But I think that this tweet kind of summarizes a lot of how the Electron world has been evolving. It says, Electron.js has officially taken over my computer, 5 out of 7, because 5 out of the 7 main apps on here are Electron-based. So that just kind of sets the stage a little bit. But really, what is Electron? And if you have to argue this, say, to a boss or trying to convince somebody, the simplest thing to say is, Electron is a way to build native desktop apps. And why would you want to build a desktop app in the modern age, right? We've got, web technology can take us so far. So there's a couple of interesting things, though, about desktop apps that we tend to forget about. So I just wanted to cover those quickly. First off, they can do what browsers can't. For example, you can browse the file system. That's not something that you can do on the web because of security restrictions. You can open files, you can interact with network cards, and then you can do stuff offline, right? You could do that with web apps as well to a degree, but ultimately, if you have something that, say, like if you're working on a plane, you're not necessarily going to have access to stuff online. And then desktop apps can also combine with other technology. And I think a great example of this is Spotify, because they actually have a C++ executable, I think is what they're using as their other tech. But you can combine this basically with anything else on the desktop, and that's not something you're going to be able to get away with on the web. You can also do computationally intense things. So if you're building an app, say like a data management system, or something that's streaming data, or maybe you're doing video encoding, those kinds of things you can do. And as Brian had mentioned earlier, you've got background stuff in Chrome now that's going to be restricted. It's going to restrict the CPU, it's going to restrict RAM. Those are things that you can basically bypass with a desktop app. And then finally, you've got distribution and exposure. Distribution, you may be able to argue that maybe a web app is a bit easier to distribute because you just go to a link and voila, the page works. But you can also distribute in a corporate environment a lot easier with a desktop app, specifically if you're in a Windows environment, being able to deploy through things like Active Directory and that type of thing. And then you can also limit your exposure. A desktop app is going to be in an isolated environment. It's going to be on a user's desktop, and you can do an awful lot with that. But the real key here is and I'm sorry, these slides, let me see if I can get these to, formatting's a bit off on this. All right, maybe not. Okay, so if you've looked up Electron at all, or if you've talked to anybody, you've probably heard that it's the combination of Node.js and Chrome. And that's a fairly accurate description, but it's not entirely true. And I wanted to point out one of the technical details here because it is kind of important to know. It's not the same Node.js that you would go and download from nodejs.org. It's actually a slightly customized version. Now, for those that aren't familiar with Node, about 60% of the code base is made up of libuv. And the guy that wrote libuv was actually hired by GitHub to modify libuv in order to work in accordance with what Electron needed for the desktop. So there is a slight modification there with Node, and that on its own isn't really that big of a deal because realistically, from the development perspective, that doesn't change what you're doing. It's still the same APIs, it still kind of behaves the same way, but it does, there are some optimizations. That's really what it kind of boils down to. The bigger point here is with Chrome. People think that you just have Chrome now available in Electron. That's not true either. It's actually based on libchromium. So you have the part that will render a page. You'll have V8, the JavaScript engine, but you're not going to have things like the bookmarking capabilities. You're not going to have the actual Chrome window. One major thing that you don't have are Chrome or desktop notifications from a web perspective. Electron has that in a different way, which we'll talk about in a moment. And hopefully this doesn't get cut off. All right, cool. So ultimately, the technology stack that you're working with when you're dealing with Electron is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But it's a little bit different from a traditional stack because you're dealing with both front-end and back-end style JavaScript at the same time. So we're talking Node, we're talking front-end. And so that's an important distinction. But really, when you're asking yourself whether or not you want to build a desktop app, there's a lot of other options out there, especially for native apps. I mean, we've seen a lot with C++. You've seen Visual Basic things. You've seen Java with Swing, Qt. There's all these other platforms, and Electron is not even the first one to attempt to use web technologies. There used to be Apollo and XUL and Adobe Air. And then, of course, there's been Node WebKit, which is now Node.js, and I'll touch on that a little bit more. But ultimately, why would you choose this stack, right? And I think it's primarily because of the people behind things. And I'm not necessarily talking about the team. I'm really talking about the skill set here. Because we just talked about a web stack. And when that web stack translates into desktop apps, that's a very powerful thing, especially if you're building a commercial app and you need talent that can actually build these apps or maintain them. So to kind of illustrate this a little bit, and boy, this is really cut off, but this is kind of a screenshot of Hack Reactor's curriculum. So Hack Reactor used to be Maker Square. They're a couple floors below us. If you're unfamiliar, they're kind of in competition with groups like the Iron Yard, General Assembly, those kinds of kind of the vocational tech boot camps. And the curriculum here, you can see HTML and CSS, JavaScript, using JS instantiation patterns. It kind of goes on about client and server oriented architectures, basically web, right? So the skill set that people are learning is web. And I thought, okay, well, great, that's the vocational schools. What about like universities and people that have gone through a more traditional CS program? And there's definitely people that can do, I mean, those are great programs. But realistically, I know when I was in school, I was in a program like that, but I was focused on the web and just on the side. That's what I wanted to do. I was focused on those kinds of technologies because they interested me. And I still see a lot of that within the current educational system. So the point here is that the talent pool behind all of this is really focused on web. And so trying to get those people up to speed in different technologies, especially when you're going from the web to something like C++, there's a pretty drastic mental shift there. So one of the major value adds of Electron and any other app like this is that you can utilize technologies that people are already familiar with. So that said, what is the Electron promise? What can you do with Electron? There's several interesting things. Native menus and notifications. I'd said before that it can't do web notifications, but that's because Electron will actually allow you to tap into things like Mac's Notification Center, same with Windows. So you're getting real desktop notifications. It's actually interacting with the desktop. It's not going through a browser or anything like that. So a great example is if you have this, if you have an app running in the background and it needs to notify the user of something, you don't have to have the web browser open to do that. It's still going to show the notification because it's just a standard notification on the desktop. You also have automatic updates, which this is a bit unique for Electron. Node WebKit, to the best of my knowledge, doesn't have anything baked in. There are some community modules that you can do it with. But really, this is kind of making your app evergreen. A great example of this is Chrome. When's the last time you updated Chrome? Never, right? Because you close Chrome and it's already downloaded the updates. It already knows what to do. Next time you boot it up, you have a fresh version of Chrome. That is all possible with Electron. It also has basic crash reporting built in. You can build Windows installers, which has anybody in here ever attempted a Windows installer? Okay, so I can sympathize with all of you. I know how much of a pain in the ass that is. So it's kind of nice to have something that can at least get you pretty far down the road with a Windows installer without having to do that on your own. And then you can also distribute this through app stores. So the Apple App Store, the Windows Store, those kinds of things. And I did mention mass builds here. I'll touch on that a little bit more in a moment. And then Electron also has some new tools. Devtron is the one, excuse me. Devtron is essentially the DevTools extension that is Electron specific. And so if you're starting out with Electron, or even if you're not, it's really useful because you can kind of dive into some of the internals and see what's going on, the Electron specific aspects. So the tooling around that is pretty nice. There's also another one that I neglected to put on here called Spectron, which is used more for unit testing. So you can test out the actual UI and some other features. And they've got several other example apps out there. So that's kind of what Electron promises you as a whole. So you convinced, Electron's something good to work with? I was. I thought Electron pretty much rocks in every case. But the things that really drew me were not necessarily all these features that I was telling you about. It was more about kind of these things here. So like the community and the pace of release is quite impressive with Electron. Like if you want to talk to the Electron team directly, they have a Slack channel for that. They're also pretty active on GitHub. They do respond to issues. In fact, about 6 months ago, I had a request. I wanted to see a little checkbox in a dialogue so that I could say, don't show this dialogue anymore because I didn't want to annoy users. Within 6 months, somebody had come in and created that, patched it. It's now in the most recent release of Electron. So it's a great community. I mean, I loved it. I didn't have to do anything except ask, you know. So and there was a new feature, again, it's pretty accessible. You'll see some people button heads on you know, the best approach for something from now and again, but that's pretty normal in any open source community. So anyhow, the community is quite good behind Electron, that's not completely you know, out of line given the fact that GitHub is so vested in Electron. They do have full-time people that are working on it. If anybody looked at the last GitHub conference, there was a whole big to-do about Electron 1.0. So yeah, there's a lot of people behind it, and then there are other companies investing. You can see Microsoft has already done a fair amount. Slack has you know, some people that are pretty active in the community, and you can talk to all these people. Anyhow, quick wins. That's another thing that I found to be real useful with Electron. You can get an app up and running very quickly, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort. It's not something, you're not going to be pushing your app out to the store you know, within a couple of days, but if you're going to fail, you should fail fast. That's something that Electron is fantastic at. So you can find out, you know, can I do what I want to do with my app? And you're not going to spend a month trying to prototype something. You're going to spend days prototyping it, maybe not even that long. And then Electron is, you know, it's cross-platform, Windows, Mac OS, Linux, so that's pretty cool. But this fifth point here is probably my favorite. It allows you to think in a single browser mentality. You're only working with Chrome. So as web developers, we often think about, well, how do I support this in Firefox? How do I support this in Opera or on mobile, or you know, wherever else I need to go? Here, you're dealing with one browser. That's it. You want to use WebRTC? Go for it. It's there. Yeah, so those kinds of things it's just a kind of freeing and liberating experience to develop with Electron, if, you know, just for that sake alone. And then, of course, there's code reusability, which I found to be interesting. But I am going to talk about that in a moment here, because you know, Electron still rocks, except when it doesn't. And some of these promises that you've heard about me speaking about are really kind of partial promises. You know, there's a lot of feature relevance. So an example would be, you're not going to have to worry about dealing with multiple browsers, but the user experience on each different platform that you develop for is different. And that's not Electron, that's each platform. So like when you look at Windows, it has a different look and feel, and it has a slightly different experience than if you're looking at it from Mac and from Linux. And so this requires a mental shift here. Even though you're using web technologies to build a desktop app, I mean, it is a desktop app, it's not a web app. And that can be a little bit challenging as you get into an Electron app, simply because it's reinforced all the time. You're still using web technology, so you feel like you're working in a browser. I mean, you can do things like, you know, Command R, and you know, it'll refresh the page, and you know, it basically works like a Chrome shell. And so it can be a little bit confusing sometimes. You're like, oh, right, I got to do this on Windows, or I need to interact with it this way for Mac. So that can be a bit of a challenge. And then advanced use cases can be a little bit difficult, mostly not because they're necessarily hard, but it's harder to find the documentation on how to do things. And in some cases, they don't exist. So there are situations where you're going to have to go and build a more advanced feature on your own. But realistically, if you are considering Electron maybe for a commercial app, it didn't faze me, and I don't think that it's fazed a lot of people, which you know, you can see just by the sheer number of apps that have been coming out with Electron. And then another argument that you hear about why Electron can suck sometimes is its footprint. When you deliver an Electron app, if you're shipping a zip file or a DMG, basically the download, that you're talking about a minimum of 40 megabytes, and that can sound pretty big. If you are shipping it with the video encoding, you're talking about, I think it's at least 110 megs because the encoder is pretty big. And there are ways to kind of trim that down, but if that scares you, then just think about another app, like maybe if you're building something off of Eclipse, that's a 330 megabyte footprint. So when you think about it relatively, that sounds nice, right? You have something that's almost half or considerably smaller. But if you're building a command line tool, then 40 megs is enormous, right? You don't want to be shipping a 40 meg command line tool, when a meg or two will do it. So my suggestion here is if you're thinking about Electron, don't think about using it as a background daemon or as a command line tool or as just something to create a new task menu. Can Electron do that? Yes. Is that the best use of it? No. And there are other tools out there that can do all of these things without Electron. So yeah, just when you're judging whether or not you want to use it, think about those things. So we've kind of looked at some of the high level stuff. Dive in a little bit of detail here, put it under a microscope. So myth or fact, web code reusability. You hear about this all the time. Can I use my Node? Can I use my Vue? Can I use React? Can I use whatever? Can I do any of my JavaScript? Will that all port? Can I create my web app and take that and just dump it into Electron or vice versa? And the answer to that, I would say, is kind of a mixed bag. It's all architecturally dependent. And what I mean by that is this is how Electron is structured. It's kind of a two-process approach. You have a main process and you have a renderer process. The way you can think about this is the main process is essentially your node layer. The renderer process is essentially your Chrome layer. So if you are not building a web app, like if you want to take a web app and make it into an Electron app, the UI components will most likely translate quite nicely. But if you are making, say, a REST call to get your data, that's something that you may have to recreate in the main process. Now, if you're not using Node, that becomes a rewrite. So that's one major challenge as far as code portability and reusability. Something else that's notable here is that this is all isolated. You are dealing with a desktop app. You are not dealing with the web. So things like REST APIs, can you do it? Yes. Should you? No. Instead, Electron has something called IPC. It's an inter-process channel or inter-process communication, and it's an evented system. So the way that I like to describe Electron to people is think about it as developing kind of a node app, but instead of interacting with your backend over an API, think about using WebSockets, because that's kind of what this is akin to. So those architectural limitations are something that you need to think about if you're trying to do a migration from a web app to a desktop app or vice versa. So cross-platform. I've brought this up a couple of times because that is one of the main promises of Electron. And again, I think that most things in the UI will translate well across platforms. But again, it gets down to the user experience and some of the native features that just simply aren't cross-platform. So an example here is on Mac, you kind of have 3 menu options. And I'm talking about the, well, I don't have, this is a Windows machine, but talking about the little toolbar at the bottom where your app icon can sit. I'm talking about the system tray, and I'm talking about the main menu. So there's 3 places you can do that on Mac, whereas on Windows, you have the main, you have your app in the tray, and then you have the system toolbar, and then all the menuing is actually in the window itself. So it's a different experience there. Those kinds of things, the menus are different. A lot of the native stuff is different, and that is not an Electron-specific thing. That's just desktop development. Some of the other things that are not quite so cross-platform capable are auto updates. They don't work on Linux at all. And behind the scenes, Electron uses Squirrel, which is another open source project. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but what you'll find very quickly is auto updates are nowhere near as easy as they seem. And Linux is a great example here, because if you are going to support all 3 of the major operating systems, you're going to have a different build process and a different release process for Linux than you are for the other 2. Some other things like jump lists, that's on Windows. If you open it up, you can have like a most recent documents or things you can click on. Those are all Windows-only features. Or Mac, of course, is the touch bar, right? And that's not even Mac specific. That's Mac laptop specific. You're not going to get that on on a Pro machine or an older Mac or anything like that. Then we get to packaging an Electron app. This is a big deal, right? You got to be able to get your app packaged up and shipped out the door. There's a couple of interesting pieces. First off, I would definitely use a tool. Don't try to do this on your own, because there are a lot of different components in this. The first tool that came out was Electron Packager. Electron Builder is based on top of that. That's the one that I would recommend you play around with, because it has support for kind of taking everything to another level with code signing and a couple of other features. But ultimately, you can package everything up. You can see your favorite file formats for each operating system: exe, MSI for Windows, DMGs for OS X, and your binary files, or an NSIS installer. You can, of course, go around this if you have more complex needs, but it's kind of nice to have this stuff just there. And Electron Builder is it's pretty cool. You can just pop it into your NPM scripts, and I just run an npm run build, and it takes care of everything. So that's kind of cool. Releasing, shipping. Lots of ways to do this in the wild. GitHub is a favorite, especially for open source projects, simply because of the release mechanism that GitHub has. You can, of course, host stuff on the web. But then we get back to the Squirrel auto updates. And Squirrel is an open source project. There's a lot of different contributors from the overall Electron community. Slack has a big handle in this. But it does differ between OS X and Mac OS and Windows. So it's something that if you're going to do automatic updates or keep your browser or keep your apps evergreen, you're going to have to get to know it a little bit, whether you like it or not, at least where things are at this current state. You can also do store-based updates. So if you are releasing your app in the Apple Store or the Windows Store, you can do it that way as well. And then I've already mentioned Linux updates. But again, one of the challenges here is that you're talking about a lot of different ways to handle updates. I don't actually touch on it in the slides here, but that's kind of a big deal, because unlike web code, your desktop code is going to sit out there. People don't necessarily have to update. So like with a web app, you push your new code and you can flush the cache and voila. You've basically forced your user to use a new version. You can't do that with a desktop app. So you may have different versions of your code floating around. So if you ship broken code, it's out there, and there's not a whole lot you can do about that. So it's kind of important to understand how these updates work and to recognize that this is a different flow than you may be used to doing with continual integration in, say, a web environment. So this one, commercial apps, Electron. I hear about this a lot, and that's what I've been focused on over the last couple of months, is building a commercial Electron app. So I wanted to cover a couple of the gotchas here. First off, business models around Electron apps. I think this is interesting because it's really driven, again, by Atom. Originally, the story goes that Atom was not going to be a free and open source IDE. It was going to be a commercial paid application. I honestly don't know why GitHub ultimately decided to open source it, but they did, and that's great for the community. But what you'll see a lot of is these open apps with a paid service, and Slack is a good example of that, where you can download Slack, you can use it for free, you pay for the upgraded service, and that's all handled server side. So it's not really an Electron-based commercial app, it's more of a commercial service that's being tacked on to Electron. The other option is licensing. So this is your more traditional approach. So if you're used to seeing things in the old days when you could enter a license key and that type of thing, that is possible with Electron, but there's not really a whole lot in the community for that right now. So in my case, I created a custom licensing solution, which honestly is still in the works. It's not trivial. But if you are going to release something commercially, it very well could be a necessity. So you need to plan around that if you're considering Electron. There's also a couple things that are acceptable in open source and hobby apps that are simply not acceptable in commercial apps. Now, I realize this is kind of small and I can't make these pictures any bigger, but these are screenshots of what a user would see with an unsigned app. So an unsigned app means that you're not doing code signing, which is taking an SSL certificate and signing your code with that through the build process. And so what this actually says is Windows has blocked the software because it can't verify the publisher. And then Mac has something very similar, and it will not allow you to proceed. Now, as a developer, there are ways to work around that, or a more advanced power user, you can work around that. But for the everyday user, this is a game stopper. I mean, you're not going to be able to ship an app like this and say it can't install. You're dead before you even get the app into their hands. So bottom line is, if you're going to go commercial, you need to think about code signing. And that's where things get a little bit interesting. Code signing is not really that hard, but it's also not that clear. There's a lot of resources out there. And I think that the real expectations are you're going to need to buy 2 certificates at a minimum if you're going to support all operating systems. You're going to have to spend money on the Apple developer license, which is about $110 after tax, and you're going to have to buy one for Windows as well. So with Windows, you have, and the Windows certificates will work on Linux as well. So at least you get a little bit of redundancy there. But there's 2 kinds of certificates that you can buy. You can buy a standard certificate, or you can buy an extended validation certificate. These are going to cost you anywhere from $60 to $250 a year for a basic one, and anywhere from $100 to $500 a year for an extended validation certificate. And the reason that this is so important is because of the way that it gets shipped to you. And so just to take a step back here, the basic code signing says, yes, you are who you say you are, and somebody has validated that. In order to get some of these things, like with Apple, you have to have a DUNS number, for example, which means that you have to have a company. So that's one kind of security check that they have. And it's very similar for the basic SSL certificates that you would get for Windows as well. An extended validation certificate requires a hell of a lot more process. It can take several weeks to actually get that, to get your certificate in. And when you do get that certificate, it's actually shipped on a dongle. It's a physical device that you have to plug in, because there is a private key, and that is not something that even the vendor can get off of that dongle. So think about your CI and CD process. You know, if you're trying to build this stuff automatically, this basically throws things like Travis CI and AppVeyor and Circle CI out the door, because you can't access that certificate from those build processes. You basically need to have something local. So you're gonna have to have your own machine that you can plug it in. And you can of course do that on like your laptop or another machine, but if you're dealing with a team, that can get to be a real pain real quick. So that's something that you can expect some pain around extended validation certificates. But again, the main benefit that you get from that is in a Windows environment, if you're using, they have something called Authenticode. And Authenticode basically says, okay, we have put you through the ringer here. We understand that you are who you say you are. We trust your app. We're going to just go ahead and install it when a user asks to install it. With a basic certificate, they're going to pop up a little screen for a while that says, we don't really know if we trust this developer. We know that they are who they say they are, but we don't know if we trust them yet. So it'll give the user the ability to either cancel the installation or proceed, which is way better than not having code signing, where it doesn't allow the user to move forward, but it's something to think about. And the challenge with that is you don't ever know when that prompt is going to go away. So without Authenticode, you're talking about an app is going to need probably about a minimum of 40 installations that users say we trust, all the way upwards of about 1,000 before Microsoft says, okay, we trust your app. You know, you've got enough users using this that we'll trust you. So I know that's an awful lot to take in on code signing alone, and unfortunately that's not all there is. The other thing is the vendor that you buy your certificates from makes a difference. Avoid Start SSL at all costs, because they've been in all kinds of trouble. Mozilla has taken them. You're not going to be able to use their certificates in Firefox. They don't comply with all of the specifications that are necessary. They've had a lot of exploits, specifically in China. So avoid Start SSL. If I had to make a recommendation, I'd say DigiCert, and the reason behind that is because it's the Microsoft recommendation, and Microsoft also happens to offer a massive discount on that. So you can get over, I think it's over 50% off. Yeah.
And that prompt, is it one time or is it per version?
It will be, as long as the installer is signed, it will be one time. Auto updates will be, you'll be okay with auto updates. So yeah, it should only be one time, but it can turn people off too. Yes?
Can you use the Windows code signing on Mac?
You can, but you need to use Wine if you're going to, especially if you're using a like an extended validation certificate. So it is possible, but I think there's actually a couple of Docker images out there that you can use to do something like that, where Wine is built in. So you're not actually doing it on Mac, but you can, if you need to, you can run everything on one machine if necessary. So yeah, any other questions on code signing? I realize I've spent a lot of time on that. Okay, all right, cool.
Should we use Start SSL?
I'm sorry?
Should we use Start SSL?
Well, I wouldn't recommend using, oh yeah, gotcha. Okay, so a couple of commercial gotchas, right? Things that you don't really realize until you get into building a commercial app. This one here really sucks. On Mac, if you want to test out your auto updates, it won't work without code signing. And that's a real drag because that means you have to build and sign your app every time you run a test. And that, in my case, I don't want to expose the dev tools to a user, and I don't want to be tapping into things like NodeMon and some of the other tools that you need to actually monitor that main process that I was talking about. So it's just a bit of work to make that, to actually check things out once you've actually created your build. That's not something that happens on Windows or Linux, but so that's a little bit of a pain when you're dealing with just trying to get your auto update service to work. The Apple App Store distribution guidelines will also require your apps to be in a sandbox, which takes away a couple of features from Electron. Most notably, that auto updates will not work. But that said, that doesn't mean that auto updates aren't available if you distribute your app through the App Store. It just means that you have to use the Apple updates. So you're actually using real system updates, not Squirrel. But one thing that you do lose completely is you don't get any crash reporting. That violates the sandbox rules. Mass here is, I believe it's the Mac application sandbox, if I'm not mistaken. But it's something to be aware of. The Windows Store, at the moment, you're dealing primarily with AppX, which is basically the most recent version of Windows. It's going to be harder to get things into the store for older editions. I anticipate that probably won't remain forever, but that's kind of where we are right now in the community. And then this last one scares a lot of people away. There's not really any kind of code protection by default other than ASAR files. Now, the ASAR format is essentially a compression of all of your files together, and it acts like a file system. So imagine basically a zip file that you're extracting stuff from. And so there's a level of protection there in the sense that if a user goes in and tries to browse your source code, it's going to be harder to get into an ASAR file than it is to just look at the raw code. But that doesn't mean that it's bulletproof by any means. In fact, it's pretty easy to pull this out. So if you're distributing your app to other Electron developers, they're going to be able to look at your code. So that's something to consider. There are ways to get around it, but again, we're talking about custom engineering. So that's just something to be aware of from a commercial perspective. If that is, if you're following a business model where your code needs to be
On the signing, what's your take on Let's Encrypt and Certbox?
Let's Encrypt doesn't work at all with Electron, and that's primarily because of the renewal cycle of every 90 days. As far as Let's Encrypt in general, awesome, I love it. But yeah, it will not work in this situation, and they will not do extended validation certificates either. So yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, they're great on price. So for anybody watching online, yeah, the question was about Let's Encrypt, which is a free SSL service that requires renewal every 90 days. It doesn't work with Electron, unfortunately.
Does Electron support cron jobs?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's going to support anything that's on the desktop. So you could, if you wanted to run a cron job from Electron, you absolutely could if you want.
I said a cron job to check the renewal every day. So
It could. The problem is you have to rebuild the app. So like you have to re-sign the whole thing and go through that process. So yeah, there's a lot of people that would really love to see Let's Encrypt support within Electron, but it's not. It's about those releases, and it's really that one-time release, as Brian had asked about. So so hopefully we'll see some movement. I'd love to see that myself. It'd be great to not have to pay for certificates like that. So yes.
Feedback on that. So Let's Encrypt, the whole purpose of signing the code is to make sure the code's secure. And Let's Encrypt, anybody can get certs. Anybody can do bad stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't think Let's Encrypt will ever be supported.
Well, that's a great point. Unless Let's Encrypt decides to get into the extended validation game, which realistically they probably won't. I mean, there's a lot of pushback against that because, again, as you said, it's about trust and verifying. You have a third party that is verifying that, yes, you are who you say you are and putting you through the rigors of that process. I've been through it a couple of times myself, and it takes a couple of weeks. You have to provide a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of calls involved, and that's just even for basic certificates with some of the groups. So yeah, Let's Encrypt, as much as I'd love to see it, I think you've got a very valid point that it's very unlikely that will ever happen. Okay, so just in the sake of time here, I'm going to move on to some general tips. I've talked about auto updates a lot. They're hard. Know that. Crash reporting is pretty easy to use, but I didn't touch on the fact that reading a crash report is not. There's basically one app. It's for Windows only, and you're going to be dealing with things like symbols and other things a lot of web developers don't usually have a clue about. I had to look a lot of stuff up initially. So actually getting that data from a crash report is not as simple as just reading a file. System logging, so if you're used to seeing things get shipped out to the event log in Windows or into the syslog in on Linux or OS X, those things don't really exist right now. That's not really something to worry too much about because you can still do logging on your own, but just know that that doesn't exist. I highly recommend avoiding native node modules whenever you can. And the reason for this is not because I have anything against native modules, it's because the native node module community, in general, there's still a pretty heavy emphasis on Mac. So you go to try to build something, or I should say on POSIX systems. So when you go to, for example, I was trying to get LevelDB running on Windows, and that was a no-go. There were just too many build problems there, and it was a royal pain. I ended up scrapping it entirely for my own custom solution. And it's just one of those kinds of things where it's a native module, you think it's going to work, but I just try to avoid them in general because it can kind of cloud up your build process. So unless you really need one, I mean, if you need it, use it. But in general, if you can avoid them, try to. Consider using event-oriented architecture whenever you can. And I put avoid socket.io in here, not because of socket.io being bad, but because a lot of that functionality already exists. So unless you're actually serving socket.io from your app or using something like that, you don't need to recreate the whole web environment just to build a desktop app. Don't support Linux commercially unless that's your market. This is a totally biased thing that I just feel like, when you start talking about auto updates on Windows being separate from Mac, and then Linux, you start getting all these build pipelines. It's just one extra thing that you have to build. And so for a lot of commercial apps, unless you're targeting developers, which ironically I am, and I'm still not supporting it, but unless you are focusing on that market, the vast majority of commercial use is going to be from Windows and Mac. And then make sure you test early and often to make sure that these things work on all the operating systems. And try to treat development like web development, but remember that it's still a desktop application you're building. So that said, that's kind of it for the Electron bit. I'm going to show you a real-world app here, the Fenix bit of this. Are there any questions before I get into that? Okay. Yes?
Do you recommend specific MSI builders that can do auto-opening certain file types and stuff like that? Do you have any for that?
For MSIs in particular, is that what you?
Yeah, we have to open certain file types with our program and stuff like that. We're using Advanced Builder right now.
Okay.
Kind of sucks to deal with.
Yeah, so the question was around MSIs and specific feature sets. I can't say that there's anything I would particularly recommend. I haven't had to do too much with MSIs. If in the situation that you're talking about with being able to do a couple of customized things, it really depends on budget. I've used BitRock for a couple of things in the past, and that has been decent. Nullsoft has been decent, but Nullsoft, honestly, I don't really have a good recommendation, for MSI specific stuff. So yeah, that you may be in a situation where you're still stuck building that installer on your own. Anything else? Okay. All right, so before I dive into Fenix, first of all, Fenix is a static desktop web server. It was originally written in Node WebKit. That was before the NW.js name change. It was, the idea behind it was I really like the idea of single page apps and APIs. So I would do a lot of my UI work really in a static environment. I never needed to do template rendering or server-side rendering of any kind. So that was really kind of one of the main reasons, that, and I actually needed a server to serve up some Sencha stuff. Because I do a lot of prototyping and testing amongst different websites, I needed to have many of them at the same time, and a single command line tool was just getting tedious in understanding the configurations and just remembering even where all of my different sites were. So that's really why Fenix kind of came around. So it is a static desktop server. One of the unique features is that it has secure real-time collaboration, meaning that you push a button and your local machine is now served publicly over an SSL connection directly to the web. So it's like a temporary web server. So if you've used something like ngrok, where you're serving up an app, behind a firewall, this does the same thing with push button, and I'll show that. And then the new feature in Fenix 3 that I'm excited to demonstrate tonight is what I like to think of as dead simple deployments. One of the key things that I learned in developing the first 2 versions of Fenix is that one of the biggest pains for UI developers is really getting up and running. So the coding isn't all that hard, but talking about setting up like a SaaS environment, setting up things like Webpack or Gulp or Grunt or whatever build process you're using, there can be a lot of intricacies to that, or even generators like Yeoman, there can be some challenges. And so I was trying to think how could we get around that? And so I think that'll crystallize a little bit more as I show that. Author.io is the brand that is going to be over Fenix. You can go check out the current version at phoenixwebserver.com right now. There are over 40,000 users of it worldwide, about 1,100 GitHub stars. I've had a lot of people that have reached out with some real interesting use cases, ranging from game development to using this on kiosks. It's been in a lot of different places. So some interesting use cases I didn't even imagine, which has been kind of exciting to see. So I'm going to actually switch over to Fenix itself here. All right. So here is the Windows version. I will say that this isn't actually ready for Windows. It's ready for Mac. It will be shipping over the next couple of weeks, both editions. But hopefully the demo gods will be in my favor here tonight. But the presentation that I've been going through is all hosted on Fenix. So none of that was online, even though it's out there. If I click on View in Browser here, you can see the slides are all out here. There you go. There's the presentation. So I'm going to fire up another server here. If my mouse will actually click. And let's see, we'll just stick with this folder here. I've got a UI folder. It looks like I was testing out some Polymer stuff at some point. So it launches, there's a new web server, and 404, nothing found there, right? Okay, well, out of pure curiosity, does anybody use Fenix 2 in here, the current edition that's out? Okay, so a couple people. If you're familiar with the file browser, that exists here, but I currently have it turned off, and I just turned it on. I'm gonna refresh this page, and now there's a file browser there. So this, you can browse through your pages. Here's a Polymer page that's up and running. There's a couple things, I think it was in platform. Yeah, we've got some better icons to kind of keep with the times here a bit. One that I'd like to point out is this README. Right now, I know this is small and unreadable on the screen. This is the raw README code. But we have in the original version of Fenix, there was rendering of that, and you can toggle that on and off. So I just toggled on Markdown, and now there's a pretty version of it. So there are a couple of nice features like that. The sharing that I mentioned, I just clicked on the share button, and it gave me a link here with copy and paste features. If you actually go to ui12.localtunnel.me right now on your machine, you will actually be browsing my laptop. So I'm going to turn that off. But that's one of the benefits of it, is that you can turn things on and off. My brother, who is actually he helped me create this, he did most of the UI work, and he's in the Slack channel right now. We will very often, he'll put together something, or I'll put something together, and we'll share and collaborate on a website in real time. So he'll make code changes, and they'll show up right then and there. And there are a couple of other neat little features. There's other toggle things, like you can minify JavaScript and CSS on the fly. There's e-tag support, there's core support, there's gzip compression, and there's this rendering of pretty JSON, XML, or YML. And I'm going to show just that one. So we'll do JSON here. Look at the Bower file. And here you can see, you know, there's, let's see if I can get that, okay. So you have a, you know, you can, it's a little bit easier to browse stuff. I mean, I personally have some JSON viewers in my browsers, but this is great for situations where you don't necessarily know what the end user that you're sharing this with has. We also have new themes. So I actually kind of like this dark theme a bit better. And everything within the file browser, it kind of goes along with the theme. A couple of other quick little things. There's a real-time log in here. Good, there's an error. That's what I was hoping for. So it'll highlight errors and things like that. In the old version of Fenix, there was it was just this ephemeral log. It would go away when you're done. Now we have the ability to actually save that to disk if you want to. And then there's a lot of nice little features. And this is what I like about the desktop application aspect of this as opposed to a web app, is I can do things like right-click and open in terminal, and what do you know, I have my page right there with all the code that I need. You can open this in Finder or Explorer or those kinds of things. There's drag and drop support, so don't know if that's actually working in Windows here, so I'm not going to try it at the moment, but there is drag and drop support for just dynamically generating a new site on the fly very quickly. And then we have preferences. And this one is a little bit cut off. So in here, you can do things like you can disable the file browser globally. So if you are security minded and you don't want your, you only want to display your web pages, not necessarily the file system underneath, you can do that. And in here, you'll notice that it's disabled globally. Yeah, there's some seed directories. You can basically configure everything to your preference to launch a new server, so you can set defaults and all that kind of good stuff. But the feature that I've mentioned a couple of times that I like the most is this deployment system. So flip back over to the slides here real quick. So one thing that we created, we have our own front-end framework as well as our own layout engine. And this happens to be the GitHub repo for it. We call it Chassis Showroom. And we have a deploy to Fenix button here. So I'm going to click on that. So if you're familiar with like deploy to Heroku, deploy to Azure, those kinds of things, this is basically deploy to localhost. So hopefully that will load up. So we have it loading up. This is just the icon from our GitHub page. And it's you may notice it says start approval process here. So again, security minded from the beginning. If I were to go into Fenix and say, all right, I want to approve everything, page updates in real time. Now you can automatically approve it. Or you can disable it entirely. So there's a lot of flexibility there. But I'm going to go ahead and prompt for approval just to show off what's going on. So I'll start the approval process. It tells me what to do here. There are a couple of use cases. So I don't know if you guys can see this because it's so small, but in the task tray down here, there's a Fenix icon that just happened to go away. I click on it. I can allow or deny this directly from the menu. I got to admit, this is a lot cleaner and easier on Mac because of where the menus exist. It's just there in forefront, so it's pretty simple. But it also prompts you in the UI as well. So I'm going to go ahead and allow this. And now I can deploy to desktop. And it's what it's doing is it's downloading the app. I had said that I wanted it to just launch automatically. So here we go. You've got our whole library, the web page, the showroom, everything ready to go right then and there. And if we want to actually start editing this, oops, wrong. I'll just open it up in Explorer right now so that you can see, there's the code. So you can open it up in terminal. Of course, you can open this up in favorite IDE and just get to town. So that is a way that we've been able to kind of create, we'll create a lot of boilerplates that we use. We'll adjust those boilerplates, and this is a great way to ship things out. So what I'm hoping to see in the community is we'd love to put out different boilerplates, things that you can just download. We hope that people will use this for that purpose. And if I didn't mention already, this is all free, and this is going to be part of the core free edition. So that's kind of where we're hoping to go with this. And just to kind of show off what's going on, I'm actually going to skip the NGNX example. That's our JavaScript framework that we've been building. And I'm going to build a badge here. And I'm going to go back to Brian's examples from earlier. because I didn't mention that we can deploy from GitHub, you can deploy from a gist, you can deploy from Bitbucket, and you can deploy from CodePen, or a custom URL that's basically a zip file. So I'm going to take the basic CSS grid stuff, copy this link here, and I'm going to it's deploy phoenixwebserver.com. Takes you to a wizard. I'll paste that code in, let it run. It goes out, it pulls down the details. Again, I apologize for the formatting on the screen. CodePen delivers an image of your code, so that's what's being displayed here. You can modify these things. Ultimately, it creates badge code, so you can generate that same badge with just clicking on the link. In this case, I'm going to take the link itself and paste it in. And this one I did for Brian, because I demoed this to him last month, and he was appalled by the enormous link that was generated, which is true. So we have a Google shortener now in here, and when we go to this page, it'll load up that CodePen that Brian created. I'm going to do the approval process again and allow this, deploy it, and now I'm working on the code that he created for us. In Fenix itself, you can see there's a new server here that was created. It automatically detects the ports.
You need to update Chrome. You need to update Chrome so the CSS grid will actually work.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, it's running an older version here. So, yeah, so that's kind of deployments in a nutshell. I think, yeah. So that's Fenix for you. That's a quick preview of Fenix 3. And I wanted to briefly discuss the challenges that we faced with Electron, because again, we did move from the WebKit into Electron. I think these kind of touch on the primary challenges that we had. One was choosing the right UI framework. For anybody who knows me, I tend to like to do things on my own rather than use what's out there. I get annoyed by a lot of little details. So we created, I mentioned creating chassis. We have a tool called NGN. That's a completely different subject for another time. But our focus, and I should actually show this off. Oops. You may notice in here that one of the things that was important to us is right now, this is in a fairly full-size window. As I start shrinking this down, the text size actually decreases. And at some point, I mean, it is responsive, and at some point we get to just a completely different view here, and we have a couple of buttons to just reinstate things. We believe in a responsive topography-based approach, so that's what we wanted for this particular app, and so that's what we created. So that was a bit of a challenge for us, but just because we're picky. You could, of course, you'll see a lot of apps out there built on Electron, a lot of Angular apps. Vue is started, there's a couple of boilerplates out there for Vue as well. So really just make sure that you choose something that you want to stick with, especially, again, as I was talking about, like if you're moving to the web later, just make sure that you have the competency and the ability to continue growing your teams with the technologies that you choose. Auto updates was also not just the normal problems that a lot of people run into, but we have 3 editions of Fenix. We have a core edition, that's going to be the free one that anybody can use, but we also have a pro one that has with things like custom headers. We have multiple web routes, which is kind of cool. So if you have an asset directory that you like to reuse in your websites, you can include that on every web server that you create. We have, I mentioned SSL. Yeah, we have push button SSL, native support for that, including full trust chain support. So we actually have a certificate authority on your desktop that can handle that for you. That's something that I don't think exists on any other static servers. And there's a couple of other features that we've been building in. Team Edition would have more collaboration features. And so the key point with this is with auto updates, we have multiple editions, but really most of the auto update stuff is not designed for multiple editions. So we've been building our own auto update service, and honestly, we're probably going to release that as a commercial offering once we wrap everything up and feel like it's ready to go. So that's something that we're hoping to give back in a sense to the community by not having to go through the pain that we've had to go through for auto updates. Proprietary code protection was another one of our challenges. We got around this by utilizing a plugin architecture. We had to build that on our own. Atom has something similar that they've built into theirs that we kind of used as inspiration. It's not as challenging as it sounds. You just kind of have to wrap your head around building your app in modules that may or may not be loaded. So that's something that we came across. And then licensing. We're not a open app commercial service. We actually do have features that we want to protect. So we do have a licensing system that we've been building, and that's also probably going to be a commercial service in the near future as well, because it has been, frankly, a royal pain. So hopefully we'll be able to contribute back to the Electron community that way. So those were really the challenges that we faced. And that's really all I have here. God, I really apologize. The formatting on this presentation was absolutely terrible. It looked a lot better, when I was putting it together. But if you have questions, you can hit me up on Twitter. You can also keep an eye on author.io. That's where we'll be posting Fenix stuff. So if this is of interest to you, check it out. But are there any questions? Yes.
Right. I was playing around with Electron earlier. One of the first things I wanted to do was have jQuery and then do some calls. And then through all the diagnosing of why that didn't work, it led me to a Stack Overflow answer that said I had to define window.dollar equals window.jQuery equals required and a path to the local jQuery install. Is that
That's totally a jQuery thing. I don't use jQuery at all in the apps, but what you're probably dealing with is a scope conflict there. There's nothing specific in Electron that says there's a problem, but what you do need to remember is that even in your front-end code, so where you're dealing with your jQuery, they are using the Node require system. So I don't know if there's a conflict there. That could be what you're running into, just a scoping issue of some sort that is specific, just because you are dealing with jQuery and Node at the same time.
So you tend not to use jQuery in yours?
I personally don't use I haven't used jQuery in years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's just me, but.
Yeah, so we use jQuery in our app, and it totally works. It's a required thing.
It's the required thing? Okay.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else? Okay, well, I think that's it then. Still have a couple minutes left and then get on that. Okay, great.
So just as a reminder, don't forget your parking card if you parked here. It's very expensive. I had to pay like $30 to get out of here one night because after telling everyone to get it, I forgot it. So please do that. And does anyone have any final announcements real quick before we leave? One here?
Hi, my name is William Baxter. I'm co-founder of a startup working out of Capital Factory here called Series X. We're building a data management and community platform for VCs and their portfolio companies. And we're very interested in talking to front-end and mobile devs. So,
cool, thanks.
Thank you.
If you were looking to hire, raise your hand real quick. So look around if you were looking for something, look for some of these hands. Other than that, like I said, a few of us are going to head over to Buffalo Billiards if you're interested. Otherwise, thanks for coming out. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so I actually have a customized instance of Express that can spin up multiple editions. So yes, it's creating a web server specifically for each one of those, and it just knows what the web length is. So that's how it's actually accomplishing. No, not for the standard servers like the ones that you would be using. On the deployments thing that I was showing, we do have a Socket.io server in there, and so that's doing that kind of communication. But no, basically everything is running through Express for the standard web experience. Yeah.
Because I've been using WebSocket, WS.
Yeah, I prefer that one, honestly.
Yeah, okay.
Straight up WebSocket.
So if I wanted to use that in an Electron app, that's already built in?
Yeah, you can use it. Yeah, because that's native in the program, so yeah, you can definitely do that.
Bootstrap built in?
No, but you can include that. There are actually a couple of templates out there that you can.
Because I used to jQuery and Bootstrap built in but as long as I go through that rigmarole.
Yeah, which it sounds like you might be able to give more insight into that than I can.
Yeah, so we use Bootstrap. We use jQuery, and I use Foundation. So you can use anything you want to have.
Hey, really enjoyed it.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Hey, man, great presentation.
You look so familiar to me.
I'm pretty much, I've been around there for about 2 years.
Have you? Okay. Were you by any chance at Node Interactive?
No, I haven't been, but I'm building I have a cybersecurity company, so we wrote everything in JavaScript. So we did a web-based application to imitate hackers. Somebody told me about Electron, and what we did is we just took our code and we just put it in for most. Yeah, now we got to figure the desktop app that's going to imitate hackers anywhere now. So now I love Electron, dude.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Like, just I don't know. It feels like a breath of fresh air.
You have a card?
I don't.
I actually followed you on Twitter. So I wanted to do a local Electron chapter because there's not one in Austin.
There is an Electron meetup group. It's fairly new, and there's only been one meetup.
I'm actually interested.
You're in it? Okay.
I'm interested.
Oh, okay. Well, the guy to look for, his name is Monaco Marino. Monico. Last name is Morino. And if you want to hit me up on meetup, like through messaging there or whatever, or yeah, it is.
So we're trying to get auto update to work. Since I'm a security company, what we're trying to do is we're trying to push updates. So TJ is my lead developer, and he's doing most of the work.
Okay.
Yeah, I ran into every problem that you mentioned. So I've been struggling with setting up auto updates. I've tried like 3 different techniques. Staying up to like 2 a.m. I still can't even get it.
Yeah. Is there a resource you can want us to that make it somewhat easier?
At the moment, no. Like that's honestly why I'm thinking about releasing what we've been doing, because at the end of the day, the challenges I found are that things are just not keeping up with pace. Like the squirrel stuff is not there, you know. And like I don't know, I was using the Electron release server, I think, the Docker image of that. And it was partially okay, but I'm starting to run into issues with 1.6.3 because it's interacting a little bit different. I can't tell right now if it's something in Electron or if it's something in Squirrel or if it's the update service or what. So we're all kind of in the same boat at the moment.
Now, can you build an in-app level updating system? Like, for example, so I write Chrome extensions where there's 2 ways to do a Chrome extension. The one way, which is how we do it, we bundle everything up, build it, deploy, and then it never calls our system again except for API calls.
Right.
The second way is the extension shell that pulls in a remote JavaScript file that then runs